The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Maya finished wiping down the last table in Section 3. Her black uniform was spotless, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her name tag sat perfectly straight on her chest. After 2 years working at Romano's Italian restaurant, she had learned that attention to detail mattered. The customers noticed everything, especially in a place like this. Romano's wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where people came to celebrate anniversaries, close business deals, and impress dates. The walls were covered in warm wood paneling, soft jazz played in the background, and fresh flowers sat on every table. In the center of the main dining room stood a beautiful black grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm light from the crystal chandelier above. Maya had always wondered why they kept a piano there when no one ever played it. The manager once told her it belonged to the original owner's wife, who used to perform for guests back in the 1980s. Now it just sat there, looking elegant but silent, like a piece of expensive furniture. At 24, Maya had gotten used to the strange look some customers gave her. They saw a young woman in a server's uniform and made assumptions. They didn't know she spent her mornings in practice rooms, her afternoons studying music theory, and her late nights working here to pay for it all. Most people didn't need to know her story anyway. She did her job well, earned decent tips, and kept her dreams to herself. The dinner rush was about to begin. Maya could tell because the hostess Lisa had started checking her lipstick more often, and the kitchen staff was moving faster. Romano's got busy on Friday nights, especially when the weather was nice like today. People wanted to go out, enjoy good food, and feel important for a few hours. Maya was arranging silverware when she heard Lisa's voice change tone at the front desk. There was a certain way Lisa spoke to VIP customers, a mix of respect and nervousness that Maya had learned to recognize. She glanced toward the entrance and saw a man in an expensive gray suit talking to Lisa. Even from across the room, Maya could tell he was someone who expected special treatment. The man was probably in his 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. He carried himself like someone who owned everything around him, standing straight with his shoulders back. Behind him stood 2 other men in similar suits, clearly business associates or employees. Lisa nodded several times as the man spoke, then led the group toward the VIP section near the piano, Maya's section. She took a deep breath and checked her notepad. Friday night customers could be demanding, but VIP customers in expensive suits were often in a different category entirely. As she watched the 3 men settle into their seats, Maya noticed how the silver-haired man looked around the restaurant like he was evaluating it. His eyes moved from the artwork on the walls to the other diners, then to the staff. When his gaze landed on Maya, she felt something cold in his expression. Not anger exactly, but the look of someone who thought he was better than everyone around him. The other servers had told Maya stories about customers like this, people who treated restaurants like their personal kingdoms and servers like servants from another century. She had been lucky so far, mostly dealing with normal people who just wanted good food and friendly service. But she had a feeling her luck might be changing. Maya grabbed her notepad and walked toward their table, putting on her professional smile. The dining room was starting to fill up with other customers, and she could hear the familiar sounds of a busy Friday night beginning. Conversations mixed with the clinking of glasses and silverware, creating the atmosphere that made Romano's feel alive. As she got closer to the table, Maya could hear pieces of their conversation. They were talking about some kind of business deal involving property downtown. The silver-haired man was clearly in charge, speaking while the others mostly listened and nodded. His voice was loud enough that nearby tables could probably hear every word. Maya had learned to read customers quickly during her time at Romano's. The nervous ones who couldn't decide what to order. The romantic couples who wanted everything perfect. The business people who needed fast service so they could get back to work. But this man was different. He spoke like someone who expected the world to revolve around him. She reached their table and waited for a pause in conversation before speaking. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Romano's. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The silver-haired man looked up at her slowly, his eyes moving from her face to her name tag and back again. There was something calculating in his expression, like he was deciding how much respect she deserved. The other two men glanced at her briefly before looking back at their menus. Maya stood patiently, her pen ready to write down their drink orders. She had learned that some customers needed a moment to shift from their conversations to interacting with staff. Usually, people were polite once they focused on her, but something about this man's expression made her think this evening might be different. The restaurant continued to buzz around them. Maya could see other servers moving between tables, taking orders and delivering food. The kitchen staff was hitting their stride, and everything was running smoothly. Romano's was at its best during busy nights like this, when every part of the operation worked together like a well-rehearsed dance. But at this table, Maya felt like she was standing in a different world. The silver-haired man continued to study her with those cold eyes, and she began to wonder what he was thinking. His expensive suit, confident posture, and the way his associates deferred to him all suggested he was used to getting his way. Maya had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this situation felt different. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or the way he seemed to be waiting for something. Whatever it was, she could sense that this wouldn't be a typical table where she took orders, served food, and received a standard tip. The grand piano sat just a few feet away from their table, its black surface gleaming under the restaurant lights. Maya had always loved having tables near the piano, even though no one ever played it. There was something elegant about serving dinner next to such a beautiful instrument, even if it was just decoration. She had no idea that before the evening was over, that silent piano would change everything. The silver-haired man finally looked up from his menu, and Maya could tell immediately that this wasn't going to be a normal table. His eyes had a sharp quality to them, like he was looking for something to criticize. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough that other diners could hear. Well, he said, drawing out the words. I suppose you're going to be taking care of us tonight. He said the word care like it was something unpleasant he had to endure. Maya kept her professional smile in place. Yes, sir, I'll be happy to serve you this evening. What can I get you to drink? Instead of answering, the man leaned back in his chair and looked her up and down again. Tell me something, sweetheart. How long have you been working here? 2 years, sir, Maya replied, still holding her pen ready. She could feel the other customers at nearby tables starting to pay attention to their conversation. 2 years, he repeated, shaking his head slowly. And I suppose this is your career? Your big plan in life? His two companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but neither said anything to stop him. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. I'm just here to take your drink order, sir. What would you like? The man laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. Oh, she's feisty. I like that. He turned to his companions. Gentlemen, we have ourselves a career waitress who thinks she can tell us what to talk about. One of the other men looked embarrassed and tried to change the subject. Robert, maybe we should just order some wine and discuss the Henderson project. But Robert wasn't finished. He was enjoying himself now, and Maya could see that familiar look in his eyes. She had heard other servers talk about customers like this. People who seemed to get pleasure from making others feel small. You know what I think? Robert continued, his voice getting even louder. I think young people today have no ambition, no drive. They're content to just drift through life, taking orders and living paycheck to paycheck. Maya could feel every eye in the section turning toward their table. The couple at table 12 had stopped eating and were watching with concerned expressions. An elderly woman at table 14 looked genuinely upset by what she was hearing. I'm sure you have dreams, don't you? Robert went on, his tone becoming more mocking. Let me guess, you want to be an actress, a model? Something glamorous that doesn't require any real work or education? Maya's grip tightened on her notepad, but she forced herself to remain calm. Sir, if you could please just tell me what you'd like to drink, I can get your evening started. There she goes again, trying to control the conversation, Robert said to his companions. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No respect for their betters, no understanding of their place in the world. The restaurant had gotten noticeably quieter. Even tables across the room seemed to sense that something uncomfortable was happening. Maya could see her manager, Tony, starting to look in their direction from behind the bar. Robert picked up his water glass and took a sip, then set it down with exaggerated care. You see, the problem with people like you is that you don't understand quality. You've probably never been anywhere nicer than this place. Never tasted real wine. Never experienced true class. Maya felt something crack inside her chest, but she held on to her composure. She had worked too hard to let someone like this make her lose her job. I understand you're important customers, and I want to make sure you have a good experience tonight. If you could just let me know what you'd like to drink. Important customers, Robert repeated with a harsh laugh. Did you hear that, gentlemen? She understands we're important. Well, at least she got something right. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a confidential tone, but was still loud enough for half the dining room to hear. Let me tell you something, honey. I probably spend more on lunch than you make in a month. I own buildings that are worth more than you'll see in your entire lifetime. So when I'm talking, you listen. Maya could see Tony starting to walk toward their table, but she also noticed something else. The other diners weren't just watching anymore. They were starting to look angry. The man at table 15 had put down his fork entirely and was staring at Robert with obvious disgust. Now, Robert continued, completely oblivious to the mood of the room, I want you to bring us your most expensive bottle of wine. Not that you'll know what it is, of course. Just ask someone in the kitchen to pick it out for you. Maya took a deep breath. Sir, I'd be happy to recommend some wines. We have an excellent selection and I'm familiar with our wine list. Robert's face turned red. Did I ask for your opinion? Did I ask what you know about wine? I told you to get someone else to pick it out because you obviously don't have the education or background to understand good wine. That was when Maya heard something that surprised her. A voice from table 12, where the couple had been eating quietly, spoke up clearly. Excuse me, the woman said, looking directly at Robert. But you're being extremely rude to this young lady. Robert turned in his chair, looking shocked that someone had dared to interrupt him. I'm sorry, but this is a private conversation. It's not private when you're talking loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, the woman replied. And it's not a conversation when you're just being mean to someone who's trying to do her job. Maya felt a rush of gratitude toward the stranger, but she also knew this could make things worse. Customers like Robert didn't like being challenged, especially not in public. Sure enough, Robert's face got even redder. I don't think you understand who you're talking to, lady. I could buy this restaurant tomorrow if I wanted to. I don't care if you could buy the whole city, the woman shot back. That doesn't give you the right to treat people badly. Now other diners were starting to murmur agreement. Maya could see heads nodding at several tables, and the elderly woman at table 14 was looking at Robert like he was something unpleasant she had found on her shoe. Robert seemed to realize that the mood in the room had shifted, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his behavior. You know what the problem is here? Nobody understands respect anymore. Nobody knows their place. He turned back to Maya, his eyes now blazing with anger and embarrassment. And you, he said, pointing his finger at her chest, you need to learn some humility. You need to understand that some people are just better than others. Maya stood perfectly still, her notepad in her hand, surrounded by the growing tension in the dining room. She could feel the support of the other customers, but she also knew that Robert wasn't done with her yet. In fact, she had the terrible feeling that he was just getting started. Robert looked around the dining room and seemed to realize that he had become the center of attention. But instead of feeling embarrassed, he appeared to enjoy it even more. Maya could see that familiar look in his eyes, the same expression she had seen on bullies in school who fed off making others uncomfortable. You know what? Robert said, pushing back his chair and standing up. His voice carried across the entire restaurant now. This whole situation is perfect. It really shows what's wrong with this generation. Maya stayed perfectly still, her notepad clutched in her hands. She could feel Tony, her manager, getting closer, but Robert's voice was commanding the attention of everyone in Romano's now. Look, around this place, Robert continued, gesturing with his arms, Beautiful restaurant, expensive furniture, and right there, he pointed directly at the grand piano, a gorgeous instrument that probably cost more than most people here make in a year. The dining room had gone completely quiet except for Robert's voice. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing to listen. Maya could see faces peering through the service window, trying to figure out what was happening. But here's the thing, Robert went on, walking closer to the piano. Nobody here has any real class. Nobody here understands what quality actually means. They just pretend to belong in a place like this. One of his companions, the man who had tried to change the subject earlier, stood up and put his hand on Robert's arm. "Come on, Robert, let's just sit down and order dinner." Robert shook him off. "No, David, this is important. This is a teachable moment." He turned back to face the room, and Maya realized with growing dread that he wasn't done with her yet. "Take our little waitress here," Robert said, looking directly at Maya. "I bet she's never even touched a piano in her life. Probably doesn't know the difference between Mozart and pop music. But she's standing there acting like she belongs in the same room as people who actually appreciate fine things." Maya felt her heart starting to pound. She had no idea where Robert was going with this, but she could sense it was about to get worse. "You want to know what real class looks like?" Robert asked the room. He walked over to the piano bench and sat down dramatically. "This is what separates the educated from the—" He looked directly at Maya. "Well, from the help." Robert placed his hands on the piano keys and began to play. Maya recognized the tune immediately. It was Chopsticks, the simple children's song that almost everyone learned when they first started piano lessons. But Robert played it slowly and deliberately, like he was performing a great masterpiece. The sound echoed through the silent restaurant. Maya could see people looking confused and embarrassed for him, but Robert seemed completely unaware of how ridiculous he looked. When he finished, Robert stood up and took a little bow. "Now that," he said proudly, "is what happens when you invest in a proper education, when you understand culture and refinement." Maya couldn't believe what she was seeing. Robert had just played the most basic piano exercise in existence and was acting like he had performed at Carnegie Hall. But before she could process this fully, Robert turned his attention back to her. "But I'm willing to be fair," Robert announced, his voice getting louder again. "I'm going to give everyone in this restaurant a chance to prove they belong here." He walked back toward Maya, that cruel smile returning to his face. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a bet with this establishment. If any member of the staff, any single person who works here, can sit at that piano and play something better than what I just played, I will personally leave a $1,000 tip." Maya heard gasps from several tables. $1,000 was more than she made in 2 weeks, but she could see the trap Robert was setting. "However," Robert continued, his smile getting wider, "when none of them can do it, when they prove they don't have the education or culture to appreciate fine music, then they need to admit something." He paused for effect, making sure he had everyone's attention. They need to admit that there are different classes of people in this world, that some people are simply better educated, more cultured, and more deserving of respect than others. The restaurant remained completely silent. Maya could see Tony frozen halfway across the dining room, clearly unsure how to handle this situation. The customers looked shocked and uncomfortable, but Robert seemed to be feeding off their discomfort. "Furthermore," Robert went on, "if no one here can meet this simple challenge, then our little waitress here needs to apologize to me and my associates for her attitude tonight. She needs to admit that she spoke out of turn and didn't show proper respect to her betters." Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Robert had created a situation where she would be humiliated no matter what happened. She knew that none of the other servers had any musical training. Tony might know a few chords on guitar, but nothing that would impress anyone on piano. "Come on," Robert said, looking around the room. "Don't be shy. Surely someone here has some culture. Someone must have had piano lessons as a child." He walked closer to Maya again. "What about you, sweetheart? Want to give it a try? I'm sure a smart girl like you must have some hidden talents." Maya could hear the mockery in his voice. He was enjoying this moment. confident that he had created a situation where he couldn't lose. Either someone would try and fail embarrassingly, or no one would try at all, and he would get his public apology. "I'm waiting," Robert said, tapping his expensive watch. "Surely one of you has enough education to play a simple song on the piano. Or are you going to prove my point about the difference between the educated class and the working class?" Maya looked around the dining room and saw faces full of sympathy and anger, but also helplessness. The customers wanted to support her, but none of them could play piano either. She was on her own. Robert was now standing right next to the piano bench, his hand resting on the instrument like he owned it. "Clock is ticking," he said. $1,000 is a lot of money for people like you. Surely it's worth a little embarrassment." Maya realized that Robert had cornered her completely. If she walked away, he would have proven his point about knowing her place. If she tried to play and failed, he would get his humiliation and his apology. He had set up a situation where he couldn't lose. But as Maya stood there in the middle of Romano's, surrounded by quiet tables and sympathetic faces, she realized something else. Robert had made one crucial mistake in his cruel little game. He had assumed he knew everything about her. He had looked at her uniform and her job and decided he knew her entire life story. Maya took a deep breath and looked at the beautiful grand piano sitting in the center of the dining room. For 2 years, she had served dinner next to that instrument, always wondering what it would sound like if someone actually played it properly. She was about to find out. Maya set her notepad down on the nearest table. The simple action seemed to echo through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. Every person in Romano's watched as she smoothed down her uniform and walked toward the piano. Robert's confident smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, this should be entertaining," he said, but Maya could hear something different in his voice now. Maybe he was starting to realize that she wasn't backing down like he expected. As Maya walked across the dining room, she could feel the weight of every eye on her. The elderly woman at table 14 gave her an encouraging nod. The couple who had defended her earlier were watching with hopeful expressions. Even the kitchen staff had gathered at the service window to see what would happen. Maya reached the piano bench and stood behind it for a moment. The instrument was even more beautiful up close. The black surface was perfectly polished, and she could see her reflection in it. She had dreamed about playing a piano like this since she was a little girl. "Well?" Robert said impatiently. "Are you going to play something or just stand there? Time is money, you know." Maya didn't answer. Instead, she sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. Her hands hovered over the keys for just a moment. She could feel Robert standing behind her, probably expecting her to play Twinkle Twinkle, Little Star, or give up entirely. What happened next changed everything. Maya's fingers found the keys, and the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the restaurant. But this wasn't the hesitant playing of someone who had learned a few songs in childhood. This was something entirely different. The music that came from the piano was breathtaking. Maya's hands moved across the keys with perfect precision, each note clear and beautiful. The melody seemed to flow through the restaurant like water, reaching every corner and touching every heart. Robert's mouth fell open. He took a step backward, his confident expression completely gone. Around the dining room, people stopped breathing. The simple beauty of the music was so unexpected, so perfect, that it seemed to transform the entire space. Maya's eyes were closed now, lost in the music. She had practiced thousands of times in small practice rooms and on old keyboards. But this piano was different. This instrument responded to her touch like it had been waiting for her all along. Every note sang out clear and true. The nocturne was just the beginning. As the last notes faded, Maya immediately transitioned into something more complex. Her fingers began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding pieces in classical music. The change in tempo and complexity was stunning. Maya's hands flew across the keys, playing passages that required years of training to master. The music built and swelled, filling every corner of Romano's with sounds that most of the diners had only heard in concert halls. Robert stood frozen, behind her, his face pale. His two companions looked equally shocked. Around the restaurant, People were leaning forward in their seats, completely captivated by what they were hearing. Maya's technique was flawless. Her left hand played the deep, rich bass notes while her right hand danced through the melody with perfect timing. The music demanded everything from the performer: strength, delicacy, speed, and emotion. And Maya delivered it all. A woman at HOA Table 16 had tears running down her cheeks. The man at Table 12 was recording with his phone, trying to capture this unexpected moment. Even Tony, the manager, stood motionless near the bar, his mouth hanging open in amazement. The music continued to build, reaching the powerful climax of the concerto. Maya's whole body moved with the music now, her shoulders and arms working together to create sounds that seemed impossible from a single person. The piano responded to her every touch, producing music that was both technically perfect and deeply emotional. When she reached a particularly difficult passage, Maya's training showed completely. Her fingers moved so fast they were almost a blur, hitting every note with perfect accuracy. This wasn't just someone who could play piano. This was someone who had dedicated their life to mastering the instrument. Robert looked like he might be sick. The arrogant smile was completely gone from his face, replaced by shock and something that might have been fear. He had expected to humiliate a simple waitress, but instead, he was watching a performance that belonged on the world's greatest stages. As the concerto reached its conclusion, Maya slowed the tempo and let the final notes ring out through the restaurant. The last chord hung in the air for several seconds before fading into complete silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The entire restaurant sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. Then the applause began. It started with the elderly woman at table 14, who began clapping slowly and deliberately. Within seconds, every person in the restaurant was on their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that shook the building. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the walls and growing louder by the second. Maya opened her eyes and turned around on the piano bench. The sight that greeted her was incredible. Every customer, every server, every cook who could see through the service window was standing and applauding. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. The applause continued for what felt like forever. People were shouting "Bravo" and "Amazing" over the clapping. The woman who had defended Maya earlier was applauding so hard her hands must have hurt. But in the middle of all this celebration, one person wasn't clapping. Robert stood exactly where Maya had left him, his face white as paper, staring at her like he had seen a ghost. Maya stood up from the piano bench and smoothed down her uniform again. She walked calmly back toward Robert's table, the applause still thundering around her. When she reached him, she stopped and looked directly into his eyes. "I'll be right back with your drink orders," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying over the applause. "Unless, of course, you've decided you'd rather eat somewhere else tonight." Robert opened and closed his mouth several times. But no. Words came out. His two companions looked embarrassed beyond belief. Around them, the applause was finally starting to die down, but people were still standing, still staring at Maya with amazement and admiration. Maya picked up her notepad from the table where she had left it and waited patiently for Robert's answer. The man who had been so confident and cruel just minutes before now looked smaller somehow, like the air had been let out of him. The entire restaurant waited to see what would happen next. Robert stood there for what felt like forever, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. The color had completely drained from his face, and Maya could see his hands shaking slightly. Around them, the restaurant was slowly returning to normal, but people kept glancing over at their table, waiting to see what would happen next. I don't understand," Robert finally managed to say. His voice was barely above a whisper, nothing like the loud, confident tone he had used all evening. Where did you learn to play like that?" Maya stood perfectly still, her notepad in her hand, waiting for him to collect himself. She could see Tony watching from across the room, ready to step in if needed. But Maya had a feeling she could handle this herself now. "That was incredible," said David, one of Robert's companions. He looked genuinely amazed and embarrassed at the same time. I mean, that was professional level playing. Concert level. Robert turned to look at David like he was speaking a foreign language. But she's just a... He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, finally realizing how terrible it would sound. Just a what? Maya asked quietly. Her voice was calm and steady, but there was something powerful in it now. The same confidence that had carried her through those complex musical passages was present in her words. Robert looked around the restaurant and seemed to notice for the first time that every single person was looking at him with disgust. The elderly woman at table 14 was shaking her head sadly. The couple who had defended Maya earlier were staring at him with open contempt. I'm a graduate student at the Manhattan School of Music, Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet restaurant. I've been studying piano for 18 years. I work here because it pays for my education and because I believe there's dignity in honest work, no matter what that work is. Robert's face somehow got even paler. Maya could see him starting to understand just how badly he had misjudged the situation. I've played in Carnegie Hall, Maya continued. I've won state and national competitions. I'm working on my master's degree in classical piano performance. But even if I wasn't, even if I had never touched a piano in my life, nothing would give you the right to treat me the way you did tonight. The restaurant was completely silent again. Maya's words carried weight and authority that made Robert seem small and petty by comparison. You made assumptions about me based on my job, Maya said. You decided I was less intelligent, less educated, less worthy of respect than you are. You tried to humiliate me in front of all these people because you thought you were better than me. Robert opened his mouth to say something, but Maya held up her hand. But here's what you don't understand, she continued. My worth as a person has nothing to do with whether I can play piano. It has nothing to do with my job or my education or how much money I make. Every person in this restaurant deserves to be treated with basic human decency, whether they're a customer or an employee, whether they have a college degree or not. Maya looked around the dining room at all the faces watching her. You talked about class and education, but real class isn't about how much money you have or what school you went to. Real class is about how you treat other people, especially people who can't fight back. Robert seemed to shrink into himself with every word. His expensive suit and confident posture couldn't protect him from the truth Maya was speaking. The saddest part, Maya said, is that you could have had a lovely dinner tonight. You could have been kind and respectful, and I would have been happy to serve you. Instead, you chose to try to make yourself feel important by making someone else feel small. Tony finally approached the table, his expression serious but controlled. Sir, he said to Robert, I think it would be best if you and your party left. Now. Robert looked around desperately as if hoping someone would come to his defense, but every face in the restaurant reflected the same message. He was not welcome here anymore. This is ridiculous, Robert said, trying to summon some of his earlier bluster. I'm a paying customer. You can't just throw me out because your waitress got lucky and knew how to play a song. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Even Robert seemed to realize how pathetic they sounded. Actually, said the woman from table 12, standing up again, we can. I'm Catherine Walsh. I'm a food critic for the Metro Journal, and I'll be writing about this evening. But I won't be writing about the food. Robert's eyes went wide. Maya could see him trying to remember everything he had said and done, realizing that his behavior would soon be public knowledge. Furthermore, Catherine continued, I recorded most of what happened here tonight. I'm sure social media would be very interested in seeing how a successful businessman treats working people. Robert looked like he might faint. In today's world, videos like that could destroy a person's reputation in hours. Please, Robert said quietly. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. You're sorry you got caught, Maya said simply. You're sorry there are consequences, but you're not sorry for who you are or how you think about people like me. David, Robert's companion, pulled out his wallet and placed several $100s on the table. For your trouble, he said to Maya. I'm deeply sorry about tonight. This doesn't represent how we all feel. Maya looked at the money but didn't touch it. "Keep your money," she said. "Just remember this evening the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their job." Tony escorted Robert and his companions toward the exit. As they walked through the dining room, not a single person looked up from their plates. The silence was more damning than any insult could have been. When the door closed behind them, the HOA restaurant erupted in applause again. People were standing and cheering for Maya, calling out compliments and words of support. The woman at table 14 got up and hugged her. Catherine Walsh shook her hand and asked for her name for the article. The excitement died down and Maya returned to work. Something amazing happened. Word spread quickly through social media about what had occurred at Romano's. Catherine's article was shared thousands of times. The video clips that several customers had taken went viral overnight. But the real change was in how people treated Maya and the other servers. Customers were kinder, more respectful, more aware that the people serving them had their own stories and dreams. A week later, Maya got a call from the Lincoln Center. They had seen the videos and wanted to offer her a spot in their Young Artist program. Romano's started hosting monthly piano nights, with Maya as the featured performer. The tips from those evenings alone were enough to cover most of her remaining tuition. Robert never returned to Romano's. His behavior that night became a cautionary tale, shared and reshared as an example of how not to treat people. Maya never saw him again, but she often thought about him. She hoped that maybe, somewhere, he had learned something from that evening. For Maya, she kept working at Romano's even after graduating. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She had learned that dignity comes from within, and that the most beautiful music happens when people treat each other with respect and kindness. The piano still sits in the center of the dining room, but now it sings every weekend, filling Romano's with music and reminding everyone who hears it that you never know what gifts the people around you might be carrying.